never underestimate the power of a screenshot. So what I mean by that is you might be having a conversation with one of your employees over social media, whether it's in Facebook Messenger, in WhatsApp, or whatever domain, I guess, you're in. But keep in mind that conversations can be very easily screenshotted and that information can be stored, and you never know when that can come back to bite you.
You're listening to episode 163 of the Fitness Business Podcast. We'd like to thank this month's premier podcast partner, Tribe Team Training. Tribe helps club owners and managers increase their profits from small group training without all the headaches. To find out more, go to tribeteamtraining.com or click on the link in today's show notes. Welcome along, everyone, and thank you for joining me. This week's special guest is Scott McKenzie, Director at Velocity Legal. I get the feeling that this week's topic is going to be of interest to a lot of you because we're chatting about how to best manage social media in your facility and the importance of implementing a social media policy. Before we get stuck into this week's show, let me first tell you a little bit about our special guest. Scott McKenzie is more than a corporate lawyer. He's also a trusted advisor. Scott guides his clients through the maze of laws affecting commercial transactions with straight talking and thinking outside the box. He's been recognised as Australia's leading lawyer to the fitness industry. Now, we're about to transition to this week's interview, but first of all, I want to thank our premier podcast partner for this month. If you want to find out how your club can make more money from small group training without all the headaches, then go to tribeteamtraining.com or click on the link in today's show notes. Enjoy this week's interview with our special guest, Scott McKenzie. Hey, Scott, welcome along and thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Thanks so much, Chantal. I'm super excited about today and can't wait to get stuck right into it.
I think that this topic is something that we all want to know more about, and I'm really excited to be able to bring your expertise to the listeners of the Fitness Business Podcast. We're talking about social media or the use of social media in gym workplaces. So perhaps from your experience, talk us through some of the issues that you've seen from people using social media in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a whole host of issues, and the really important thing here is there are internal issues, so between a gym owner and their employees, and then there are more external issues, so between the gym and its members in more of a public domain. So on the employee side of things, it generally stems from inappropriate comments being made or people being put in a bit of a precarious position. And we've seen pretty much every situation imaginable, from employees making defamation claims to employees saying that they were, sexually harassed. And then, of course, that just creates a whole host of headaches and issues for both the employees and the gym owner in that situation. Then on more of the external side, it generally stems from people taking offence to content that is put out on social media by gym owners. Mm-hmm. Once again, it can be any number of things. People can be saying that the content's inappropriate, it's breaching certain, terms and conditions, whether it's the gym's terms and conditions or Facebook's terms and conditions, and pretty much anything. We see a whole host of different claims in that regard.
You actually sent me through an article before we caught up today, which was exactly in relation to that, where a gym owner in the States had, I think, posted a photo, put quite a controversial headline, and then there was a massive uproar. There was a walkout of a whole lot of members. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, it really snowballed very quickly in the sense that one person took issue with the particular content that was put up by the gym owner, and then that one person just managed to gather a swarm of other people behind them, and then before you know it, there were multiple negative Google reviews and just general uproar. The media were kind of circling, and it went from what was generally considered to be a pretty benign situation of a gym owner posting something on social media to an absolute Armageddon situation very, very quickly.
Yeah, we might actually include that link in today's show notes so everyone can have a read, because it's quite a detailed article, and it's certainly a little bit scary as to what something like that can turn into. And it's one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to you today, so that we can make sure that we are thinking about, how we're actually placing our social media, how our staff are using social media, so that hopefully nobody else gets themselves into that situation. One of the things, Scott, that I think most gym owners do these days just by default as part of their sign-up form is quite often we put like a photography waiver and stuff like that. So we have certain rules that we make people aware of when they become members of our gyms. What rules do you think, or do you suggest putting in place to manage issues around social media?
Yeah, I definitely recommend having some form of social media policy or some kind of guidance so that everyone is on the same page about really how to deal with social media. And it should be backed up with some kind of training on a continual basis to make sure that everyone is on the same page to the greatest extent possible. In terms of what you would put into that policy on a public post type of level, the most important thing is how you react when you get someone who is criticizing something you posted or taking offense to something that you've put out there. Now, what I always recommend that my clients do is, if you're getting really emotional about a comment that someone has made, you should always sleep on it and really think carefully about how you address any, I guess, anger or any kind of comments that are made by members that you think, or members or just people in the public generally, that you think have a potential to harm your reputation, because nothing will make it snowball faster than, a really negative, over-the-top emotional reaction from the gym owner. Obviously, it's important to be fun with content that you put out on social media, but you've got to know your audience, and if in doubt, probably don't. On more of from an internal perspective, never underestimate the power of a screenshot. So what I mean by that is, you might be having a conversation with one of your employees over social media, whether it's in Facebook Messenger, in WhatsApp, or whatever domain, I guess, you're in. But keep in mind that conversations can be very easily screenshotted, and that information can be stored, and you never know when that can come back to bite you. And we do live in a world where political correctness is, it's increasingly becoming important. And I'd say be very careful about saying anything that you wouldn't be comfortable saying to a group of people in public.
It's interesting that you mentioned WhatsApp, because when I think about social media, my mind instantly goes to Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter. But of course, there are all of those internal chat channels like WhatsApp and Slack, and that so many people do use these days to communicate with your team. So I think that's actually a really good thing for us to remember, that it's not just kind of those public-facing social medias, but where you're communicating with your team in what you think might be an internal-only conversation.
Exactly right. And you get this kind of illusion of privacy in those kind of internal communications. If it's a WhatsApp group with, the gym owner and all of their PTs or their manager or whoever, you think that, this is a secretive domain in which no one else can actually look in on this conversation. But going back to what I said earlier, people can very easily screenshot conversations and send it to their friends and say something like, I can't believe the guy who owns this gym or the lady who owns this gym said these things. And then it gets into the media's hands, and then, it's on for young and old.
Exactly. Scott, is there such a thing as a standard social media template for businesses, or do we need to start from scratch in creating something?
Yes, so I'm a massive fan of substance over form. So whether you call it a social media policy, whether it's a guideline written on the back of a napkin, like it honestly, the form doesn't matter. The most important thing is that everyone's on the same page about how social media should be used and how the business should be engaging on social media, both internally and externally. The form of that is kind of irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. And I have no doubt that some of the best drafted social media policies are sitting in someone's top drawer and have never even been looked at. So, yeah, it's more important how it's actually used rather than the wording.
And from a legal standpoint, should a social media policy be presented to the employee upon their initial employment? Should they be signing a document to say that, yep, they've read and understood it? Like, what's the formality around something like a social media policy?
Yeah, so the absolute best case scenario is getting the employee to sign something acknowledging that they've received the policy and that they're comfortable with everything it says and they promise to adhere to it. That's certainly what I recommend for my clients. I do recognise that it's not always a perfect world that we live in, and going to that extreme isn't always possible, but really you should have some kind of paper trail demonstrating that your employees should know exactly what your rules are and what the boundaries are, so that if there ever are any issues, you can quickly say, well, look, I've got this evidence here, you should have known better and you breached the policy for whatever reason.
Scott, one of the things that we see a lot of today is personal trainers within a fitness facility who are they're influencers, they've got big followings on Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat, and they are often, whether it's formal or not, they're often acting as ambassadors for our facilities. They're representing our facilities, they're taking photos and videos within there and tagging the gym name and that type of thing. Talk to us about that. How do we best manage that particular situation? How do we ensure that a personal trainer or a fitness instructor that works for our business is representing our business in the way that we want them to? Should we have a formal arrangement with that person? Is there any advice you can give us around that?
Yeah, so this is such a delicate balance because on one hand, you want that PT or whoever it is, the instructor, to have the freedom to really connect with their audience. And at the end of the day, if they've built up a good following, that's a testament to how well they're connecting with their audience. And you don't want to just turn them into a mouthpiece for your gym, and that will create more issues than problems it'll solve if you go down that path. That's my personal view on it. In terms of actually quarantining the content and making sure that it's all okay, the biggest issue that gym owners will face is they are not actually the ones who get to click on the post button. It's actually the PT or the instructor or whoever it is that has that power. So you can have all the pretty looking contracts you like and you can make them sign as many things as you like. But at the end of the day, that risk is still there. And it goes back to what we discussed earlier, having a good social media policy and making sure everyone is on the same page about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. That's the most important thing, because if you can cultivate a little bit of a change within that PT and maybe they go from posting quite outrageous stuff to more moderate stuff, then that's a good thing. And having a good policy in place and the training to really cultivate that change is the best way of doing it.
One of the things that I neglected to mention earlier, and I want to bring it up so that people don't miss out on this bit of information, is you said right at the very beginning how important it was that if you get a negative piece of feedback on social media, that you don't have that gut reaction and answer it immediately, but you take the time to actually sleep on it and have a think about it before you respond. And I just want to remind everyone that there's a fantastic book that was released by Jay Baer called Hug Your Haters. And Hug Your Haters basically gives you guidelines on how to respond to negative comments and negative feedback on your social media sites. So if anyone needs a little bit of guidance around the actual ways in which to respond, then that's a really good reference for you to check out. So it's Hug Your Haters, Jay Bear, and he was a guest on the show back in 2016. I'll put the link in today's show notes. So Scott, to finish off today, I think it would be nice to leave all of the FBP family perhaps with your top 3 tips for how to get started in implementing a social media policy and a social media or even a culture around the usage of social media within our facility. Have you got a couple of takeaways you can leave us with today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I would say is keep in mind that it's substance over form. So you should not be caring about whether you've got a 30-page policy that's airtight or something written on the back of a napkin. The most important thing is that you actually truly live the values within that policy and that you make it clear to the PTs and everyone working your business that that is the way you deal with social media. There is no point in having a policy if no one's going to actually follow it. Obviously, from a legal perspective, the more formal you make the policy, the better. But just make sure it doesn't sit in the top drawer and make sure that you continually revisit it and get everyone's buy-in on it. The second thing that I would definitely say is keep in mind that it's now easier than ever before to gather a swarm of people behind you and to really attack something you don't like. And the takeaway from that is if you really annoy someone or if you post content that someone thinks is a little bit objectionable, you need to keep in mind that that first response that you provide is critical, because if there's a lot of commotion around a certain post or an article that you've published or some content that you've put up, and then people visit that in a swarm because, you know, there's all this commotion, you want to make sure that you have a very clear and deliberate response provided so that the regular person looking at your page will think, oh, these guys are pretty reasonable and this gym's taking appropriate steps. And I'd certainly echo your comments about it. Jay Bear's book, you should definitely take some guidance from that. The third thing that I'd say is in terms of pushing the envelope with social media content, I've seen this more and more purely because we live in an attention economy where everyone is trying to grab everyone's attention, and there's this massive saturation of different gyms trying to go after the same segments. Of course, that encourages people to lift the stakes a little bit and not just have plain and boring content on social media. That's a great thing, but keep in mind that the more you jostle for position and try to be more outrageous or more crazy than other people, the higher your risk is. So just be mindful of the content.
Yeah, that's 3 fantastic pieces of advice, Scott. Thank you. Now, you deal every single day with issues, with legal issues in the fitness industry. So if people have listened to our chat today and they want to know more, they want to chat to you about something specific to their facility, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
I'm definitely a fan of the more personal approach, so you can just email me. It's just Scott, SCOTT, at velocitylegal.com.au.
That's great. And of course, we'll put all of Scott's contact details in today's show notes. So I love that we talked about this topic. I feel like it's something that we can probably revisit again in 6 to 12 months' time, because things are changing so rapidly in the world of social media and we learn as we go. So, Scott, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today and sharing your experience with listeners of the Fitness Business Podcast.
No, thank you so much, Chantal. Really appreciate it.
Tribe, if you haven't explored a functional training space for your gym, then now is the time. With Queenex Functional Training by Precor, there is a unit to fit every space. Plus, education is included to ensure that training is delivered with confidence. You need to jump online and check this out right now. Go to precor.com/fitness business podcast.
Precor Quickfire 5.
I am joined today by Chris Roussos, the CEO of 24 Hour Fitness. Chris, welcome and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Honored to be here.
It is absolutely so exciting to have you on the show. And we're going to kick things off with the Precore Quick Fire 5. Can you tell everyone, why do you do what you do?
I do what I do every day because I really enjoy helping people and helping them accomplish whatever their goals are. And at 24, we do that every day. And it's just inspiring.
And what's one ritual that helps you become better at what you do?
I discipline around my schedule. I'm a 4 a.m. riser, and how I set up the day and everything from working out to reading, spending time with colleagues, and a lot of routinization on that really helps me stay on task and stay focused.
That is a nice early wake up time, that one. And
we are 24. You got to do it.
Exactly. It makes sense. Are there any apps or systems that you use to stay on top of your workload?
Yes. On the business side, I use Outlook. I'm sure like all the listeners are using. And then on the personal fitness side, we recently launched 24 Go. I'm a huge user of that. Every day I turn it on and get after it with the workouts.
That's brilliant. And are there any books, podcasts, or blogs that you would recommend, and why?
Podcast besides this one?
Exactly. That's the right answer.
I'm a very voracious reader. I love to read. A recent book was Grit by Angela Duckworth. And I'll talk a little more about it later as part of our leadership development program. We're constantly rolling books out and curriculum to our leaders, but that's been a fantastic book that I've really enjoyed.
I have just started reading Grit myself after a recommendation from another friend in the US. So there you go. And so I'm going to get stuck into it now that you've said that. And tell everyone the topic that we're going to be focusing on during our main chat.
Our main chat, I think, is this 24. Where are we today? Where are we going? Things that we're thinking about. And I think most importantly, listening to some of the other podcasts, a lot of the things we're focused on here is how do we as an industry develop our people so that we continue to bring fitness and wellness to all the communities that we're in and growing our business and thriving and being successful. So whatever I can do to help and we can work together as an industry, I think is an opportunity here to talk about here on the podcast.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you so much because I'm so thrilled that you're joining us on the show. I'm really looking forward to your main interview. And thank you for chatting to me today for our Precore Quickfire 5.
Thank you. Again, honored to be here.
For the full interview with Chris, make sure that you tune into show 165, which was released on April 18th. Before we finish off today, a reminder that all the resources, the links, and a transcript for today's show can be found at fitnessbusinesspodcast.com. A big thank you to our founding partner, Active Management. They have an amazing gift for you. Their #1 selling checklist is yours for free. It will turn your About Us page on your website into a lead generating page. All you need to do is go to fitnessbusinesspodcast.com/active to collect your free download. Thank you for joining me for another week of the show. I look forward to seeing you next week. And remember, what you leave behind is not what's engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others.